Hi and welcome back to day 2 of Le Web live in Paris. I'm Mark Davis, and for the next 2 days, that's today and tomorrow, you'll be able to join me for a series of Google Plus Hangouts with some of the speakers here at Le Web, which is an annual get-together of all things internet and entrepreneurial. Now, if you'd like to take part in these Hangouts, then you can follow Euronews.com, and on the homepage follow the signs for Le Web, where you'll find a schedule and a registration form. Now, today, day 2, the focus starts to shift to startups. The startup competition actually began this morning, and the first session of day 2 on the main stage was the invasion of the European startups. Now, on that panel was our first guest of the day, Nicolas Brusson, who's the co-founder of BlaBlaCar. We're joined also by Hangout by 2 guests. We have Arnaud, who is in... Arnaud, you're in France?
Yes, I'm in Paris. Hello.
Hi there. And we're joined by Michael from Ukraine, who was with us yesterday.
Yep.
Hi again, Michael. Now, Nicolas, BlaBlaCar. It grew quite expansively in the last year, and you now count 10 million members, 2 million of whom travel per month with BlaBlaCar, which is an intercity carpooling, car-sharing service. Now, what you did was you expanded very quickly. You expanded throughout Europe, in fact. Before you had really proven the business model in France, which is where you started. Now that seems, would it be fair to say that that's kind of risk-taking US style rather than European style, à la française?
Yeah, I think in a way you're right. I mean, it's a way to take a bigger risk at the beginning, but it's also, I mean, the way I see it, it's a way to define your market a bit differently. Right, so if you're a European company today, you can either define your market as being France or Germany or the UK, and you think of that as being your market, and you develop your company, you prove your model, you scale your model, and then after a while you decide, okay, now I'm the king of France, I'm the king of the UK for XYZ services, and now I'm going to expand. The issue is historically that model has never worked so well in Europe, because if you become like the biggest e-commerce of XYZ or the biggest marketplace of ABC in Germany or in France, by the time you want to expand, someone has done the same thing in the other countries in Europe. And it's too late for you to expand, and you don't have like a bigger market than these guys, so you fail to expand. So what we decided to do almost 3 years ago in a way was to change the thinking and to start thinking, well, our market owes to be Europe. Right, so in a way, if you start to think like that, I don't even think of like taking a bigger risk or a smaller risk. I think of that as redefining your market, thinking we need to target Europe as a step 1. So we need to be in Spain, we need to be in Italy, we need to be in Germany, we need to be in the UK, and we need to do that pretty quickly. And then it means you need to raise more money, maybe more US style, but it's more a function of the market you target. Right, so the challenge is more, how do you convince people that you can tackle all these markets at once, as opposed to do that sequentially.
And your operating model, you like to rely on local teams, and it's a little bit in a way like a microcosm of the EU. You've got a centralized company in the EU Commission. Mm-hmm. In your case, your headquarters are in Paris, but each team is localized. That's how you like to operate.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's essentially we had to innovate on the model because we cannot look at the US as an example. Because the US has a huge domestic market. So essentially what you can do in the US is you can build your service, end up with a massive domestic market, and then later on you decide, okay, now it's time for me to go to Europe, I'm going to raise additional funding, and I'm going to go one country, one by one in Europe. Trying to do things centrally from Europe, like you're thinking that you're going to have just one office in Paris and you're going to tackle Germany and the UK and Spain and Italy, typically doesn't work. And it's a very good analogy you gave with Europe. It doesn't work because different markets, different languages, different cultures, slightly different regulations. You need to set up a local company, which is very different if you expand within the US. You're not going to set up like a local company in every state in the US. If I want to operate in Germany, if I want to operate in Spain, I need to have like a local company. I need to have people on the ground. So we decided to do that with what we call local teams in every country, and to give quite a bit of autonomy to these local teams to grow their market. And then we try to coordinate everything centrally from Paris. So we've done that pretty early on, and we've done that in two ways. We've done that by hiring people as sort of country managers or general managers to manage those countries, but also by acquiring companies. So we thought like maybe the best way to go to, for example, Italy or Poland was let's find the best guy actually doing more or less what we do, exactly what we do, and let's convince this entrepreneur actually to join BlaBlaCar and to become like the local entrepreneur for BlaBlaCar in Italy, in Poland, in Russia, and we've done that in several countries actually. So it was a fast way to expand.
And do these people take much convincing?
Yeah, it does, especially the first time around, right? Because it's a strange proposal, right? At the beginning you say, well, we studied that from France, and now why don't you join us? Why don't you become like a partner? Or it's almost like becoming a co-founder in a way of BlaBlaCar, and we're going to build that together. You ask that entrepreneur to give up his project to some extent. I mean, not quite, but to give up his project, to give up his brand, his product, and to integrate all of that into a single brand, single product that we're going to scale globally. So initially, like the first time I've done that was between 2011 and 2012 with Olivier Bremer, actually in Italy. Who was a fantastic guy. Actually, was a Swiss German. Started the company in Italy. Was based in Germany, and it took about 9 months actually of talking, of making sure, in a way, of making sure we had the same dream. We wanted to build the same thing, and we were just like okay to work together and build that together. And then we've done that in Poland. Then we've done that in Russia. And of course, as you do 2-3 times the same approach, it gets easier and easier because people give you more credit for what you've done, right? So essentially today, when I talk to companies in different countries in the world, and I say, well, we could hire you, and you're going to join the team, and you're going to launch XYZ country for BlaBlaCar. At least we have proof points to say we've done it before, it worked well, it's a good model.
Now, with specific regard to BlaBlaCar and the as part of the sharing economy, trust and reputation are huge factors for your customers. Now, in Europe, we do have this diversity of language, which they don't have in the US, for example. But is this language barrier an obstacle to trust on a European sharing economy scale?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think like essentially like culture, like differences of culture in Europe or differences of languages in Europe is a barrier for our service or even for trust within the service. I mean, we see it's a barrier in terms of exchange. If people spend time together in a car and they cannot talk, it's a challenge. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you look at most Europe, it's pretty homogeneous in a way, not in terms of languages, not in terms of like the type of food we eat, but think of what we do in terms of transport. I mean, the way you drive from Madrid to Valencia, Berlin to Hamburg, London to Manchester, it's about the same. Your travel needs are about the same. Your budget is about the same. So lots of these things are about the same. So of course you need to adapt your marketing messages. You need to adapt your product to local culture. But I don't think language is the issue. I don't think culture is the issue. The biggest challenge we had actually to expand globally was mostly like tiny things around regulation, setting up a company, hiring people locally, which is a bit of like a hurdle every time you have to go through, more so than would Spanish people use the service. And it's funny because it's always been the perception when we launched a new country, people said maybe people do city-to-city ride sharing in France and because for whatever reason, but they're never going to do that in Germany. They're never going to do that in Spain. And we found out, launching over 13 countries now, 14 I think, that it's not quite true. I mean, the basic need is the same. You need to articulate it a bit differently, but the basic need is the same.
I'd like to go to our guests, to Arnaud and to Michael. Let's do this in alphabetical order. Arnaud.
Yes. Hello, Nicolas. Do you hear me well?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Hi, Arnaud.
So I guess you have a critical number of members to have a service that is working efficiently. So you mentioned that you were buying other companies to have these members. But beyond that, what is your strategy to recruit a vast number of members in a short time so that the service is working?
Yeah, so you make a good point. I mean, one of the challenge we have at BlaBlaCar is we are a marketplace between drivers and passengers. So unless you get like lots of drivers, lots of passengers very early on when you launch a new country, you're pretty useless, right? Because a passenger would look for a car at 6 p.m. between Madrid and Valencia, and you don't have a driver because you just have a driver on Thursday at 4 p.m. So what we realized is it's all about education and educational marketing and education, because whenever we launch a new country, people are not looking for BlaBlaCar, right? So they're not looking for this kind of service because they've never used it. So what we cannot do is we cannot go to Google, for example, and say, well, let's buy all the keywords for ride sharing. Actually, no one is actually looking for ride sharing. No one is bidding for ride sharing. So what we do initially is we do lots of educational marketing. So we use all kind of channel, online, offline. We do meetups. So once we have the early members, actually we spend a lot of time meeting those members, talking to these members, making sure we trigger word of mouth. And increasingly we invest more and more in the first sort of like 6 to 12 months in educational, what I call educational marketing. So it's articulating the activity, explaining the benefits of the activity, and doing that again both online and offline pretty rapidly. Otherwise the service never takes off. So it's one of the secret sauce. Essentially it's like, how do you find the right mix of marketing and communication and PR at the beginning, and the right messages in the right channels to take off?
Alors, honnêtement, c'est comme ça tenait à l'aise. Si tu veux bien, on va faire des synthèses.
Okay, let's
Si tu veux maintenant,
Michael, let's go to you now.
on se parle, tu vois, rapidement.
Yeah, hello. Nicola, it was interesting to watching you speaking. Actually, in Ukraine, you bought about 1 year ago startup called Podorozhniki, and it's become BlaBlaCar.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask you about monetization options in Eastern Europe. It's obvious that legislation and everything is absolutely different, mentality is different, and now you operate in Ukraine for free for 1 year already. So actually tomorrow I'm taking train to another city, and I tried BlaBlaCar and train, and actually train is cheaper and faster, and BlaBlaCar is free, and people try to pack their car like buses, so it's not very comfortable. So I wanted to ask you how you think about monetization in Eastern Europe. When you're gonna start it, or maybe you're gonna offer a completely different business model here, since our countries like Ukraine and Europe, we get different mentality. While we're still close, but we are like post-USSR and totally everything different. So how you deal with this?
Yeah, so essentially we have the same approach in every country when it comes to monetization. Today we only monetize 2 countries, France and Spain actually. So that's the only 2 countries we monetize. But initially, essentially, it's all about creating value. So initially, it's all about making sure people use the service, making sure drivers offer rides, passengers book those rides and travel together. So today in Eastern Europe and in especially in Russia and in Ukraine, actually, we're not at all right now focusing on how we're going to monetize. We're focusing on making sure we create value. So the thing we track is like how much money actually is being exchanged between passengers and drivers, and that we track. And when you say BlaBlaCar is free, it's never really free, right? Because the passenger is always paying the driver. So the key question is like, when do you enable some kind of online booking where people can actually pay online, and then obviously as they pay online, we can start taking a fee. But that's not something we focus on early in the creation of the marketplace. We really focus on creating value with the belief that once you have like a community transacting and using your service at a massive scale, then you can always extract value by either taking a booking fee or doing something else. So today, strangely enough, there is no short-term strategy to go and monetize Ukraine or go and monetize Russia. It's all about usage. So we're focusing on usage, knowing that people do transact, and as long as they transact, then later on we ought to find a way to monetize.
Do you find there's much turbulence when you, when in France and in Spain, when you've gone from when you've started to monetize the service?
Not really, actually. I mean, because what we do is again, I think sometimes the misconception is this notion of it's free and then it's not free. And it's not at all the way it's perceived as a user, because as a user, if you offer a ride on BlaBlaCar, let's say in Russia, we talked about Russia, so let's say we in Russia, what's going to happen is I'm going to pay you $20 on the car, right? In the car, I'm going to pay you in cash. Once we enable the online booking, I'm going to pay that amount online. But as a passenger, I'm still paying. As a driver, I'm still collecting money, right? So it's more like the method of collection has changed from, we call each other and we pay in the car, to we pay online and we do like a bank transfer. So and then of course like we had like a small fee on top of that, which is about 10%. But if you think of like adding or not adding 10% to the overall price, it's pretty irrelevant in the grand scheme of things when your option might be a train or a bus that's like 2 or 3 times more expensive. So it doesn't really matter. So we need to do a bit of education around the transition and why we do the transition. But most of the time, essentially like the way we articulate that transition is around trust, actually. So it's building more trust in the transaction, so that I pay online, I have your bank account, or at least we have your bank account, we have my credit card, we know I committed to ride with you at 6 p.m. on a Friday. So payment is like the last leg of trust for us. Right. So initially we do like peer-to-peer reviews, we do checks, we check your mobile phone, we do your Facebook Connect, and then eventually through payment, actually, we collect even more information about the users, which is going to enable more reliability and more trust.
So formalizing that awkward little moment where the money changes hands can actually build trust in the network.
Exactly, and that too, actually. So at some point it gets a bit awkward to pay cash in the car. The reason we don't do that initially is, as we talked about, in some countries, actually, all the payment systems are a bit complex. So we don't want to take that complexity of payment early on. So it's just like a technical complexity, number one. And number two, it's hard to ask for too much, right, when you launch a new service. Because we're already asking them to essentially try something new, try ride sharing, which they've never done. And if you say, well, now you need to give me your mobile number, you need to give me your bank account, you need to give me this, you need to give me that, you might never take off, actually, because you're asking for too much information. And the users actually don't trust you as a service yet because they have not used you. So, and when they started to use the service 2, 3, 10 times, and they understand the concept and they value the service, it's much easier to gather more information and to enable payment online.
Sure. I'd like to ask you a few questions about EU startups in general, but Arnaud and Michael, do you have any more questions specifically relating to BlaBlaCar?
Yes, perhaps one question about the way you want to position BlaBlaCar on other markets. We see that the sharing economy is something really big now, having great impact on traditional economy. We can mention Uber or Airbnb. And do you find other markets where BlaBlaCar wants to invest to develop new services, or today you want to focus on car sharing?
Yeah, so today it's a good question, and it's something we think about all the time. It's like, what should we do? I mean, what should be the next step? Should it be to stay where we are, essentially, in terms of footprint, geographical footprint, and build new verticals, knowing that we have a community of people who share rides and maybe they can share something else, or should we actually keep expanding globally? And today, clearly, the focus for the next year or the next couple of years is going to be global expansion. And the reason why is we realize in France, in Spain, in most of the European countries that the size of the market or the size of the opportunity we have is just huge. It's just massive. And today, when we launch a country like Russia, when we launch a country like Turkey, and we see that very quickly we get like hundreds of thousands of people joining the service, you realize how massive it could be in Latin America, in India, in Asia, where we have not even been yet. So today the focus is, we have something that works, we want to improve it, and we want to bring that to the world. And that was sort of the strategy. In a way, that was the strategy from day one, with doing that in France, then scaling that into Europe and making that like a European service, and now from Europe making that a global service. So the key focus for the next, I would say, couple of years is probably going to be about global expansion.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the European startup environment. What would you say are the things that European startups must do and the things that they must avoid?
I would say the thing we must do as a European startup, if we want to be relevant at all, is to be European, is to tackle Europe as a market. So today, the thing we should avoid doing is having like national consumer internet companies. So we should not like build a German e-commerce company. We should build a European e-commerce company from Germany or from France or from anywhere. So that's the biggest challenge I think we face today. Today, again, like building, for us, for example, like building a BlaBlaCar France would be kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. So it's different today if you're Chinese or if you're from India or if you're from the US, because your domestic market is so large that you can build Alibaba from China. That's good enough. That's one of the biggest companies in the world. You cannot build Alibaba from France, Germany, or the UK. But you can do that from Europe, actually. Europe is as big as a market as the US or China. So I guess what I wish for the next generation of European entrepreneur or the existing generation is that we start thinking of Europe as our market, and very quickly we build this European footprint type company, and then we'll matter in the world essentially as global companies.
Do you think that the European Commission should be more or could be more robust in defending European startups, and how?
Yeah, in a way, I think they are. So I think they are supportive. I think the issue is the speed of change, right? It's changing it's a bit too slow, but it is changing. If you think of like roaming charges, it's being dropped thanks to the EU. If you think of transport regulation, they evolved thanks to the EU. If you think of Erasmus, where students can actually go everywhere and study in every country in Europe, that's also thanks to the European Commission in Europe. So it has evolved. I think it's much easier now than it was like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's still too complex though. So I think what Europe could do and should push is to essentially like make regulations a lot simpler, make regulation a lot more European. Make labor law, which is like in a long while, make labor law more European. I mean, what I'd love to be able to do is to say, I've built one company, I have one entity in France, and then I can hire people all over Europe from this company. That'd be easy. Today we cannot do that. Today you need to set up a company in the UK, in Germany, in Spain, and you end up like hiring accountants and lawyers in every country in Europe. That's a waste of time, right?
And it's also, I think, a lot easier said than done to harmonise labour laws across the 28.
Absolutely.
Back to Michael. Do you have any questions regarding the European startup situation?
Probably not European. I still got one question about BlaBlaCar, and I wanted to ask. Actually, you can think about BlaBlaCar like Uber for intercity. Okay, different model, but still kind of you still need to get from A to B using somebody's car. Are you gonna train drivers, or maybe split in like VIP great car or not VIP? No, like Uber train taxi drivers for them to provide some quality of service. So that's the question. Are you gonna offer this service for drivers to provide better quality service to people they live?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in a way we are quite different from Uber in many ways. I mean, not just. I mean, you mentioned the obvious thing, which is short distance versus long distance, but even the whole setup of the marketplace is different. Uber is very much on demand, right? So it's a demand-driven marketplace, whereas we tend to be a supply-driven marketplace. So we're not on demand, we're scheduled, right? So if you think of BlaBlaCar, a driver would tell us, I'm driving from London to Manchester in 2 days at 7 p.m. And then we have that supply, so we capture that information, and we capture lots of information about the driver. And then a passenger would come a day later or a few hours later and would say, I'm looking for a ride between London and Manchester, and would book a seat in the car. So the paradigm, the whole interaction is very different. It's also very different because we're building a community. So if we think of BlaBlaCar, a third of users are either driver or passenger. Think of Uber, it's not the case. I mean, maybe as a passenger on Uber, you've never been a driver on Uber, and maybe vice versa. So we're very much community-based. We're very much about like scheduled type service and long distance. So what it means is essentially we work on the community and not on the driver, right? So we don't think of that as we have drivers. We think of that as we have a community of people that happen to be drivers or passengers depending on the day, depending on what they want to do. So today we focus on making the interaction between the members easier, and we don't try to control the type of car or what should happen in the car, essentially, because it's up to the driver and the passenger to define that. So it's something we push back on the community. And what we do is we focus on creating the best environment for trust, transaction, reliability for the community, and not so much like the type of car or the model of the car. That's up to the community. And again, like as a passenger, you have so much choice on BlaBlaCar, then you can pick whatever car you want, whatever driver you want, based on peer reviews, based on photos, based on the photo of the car, and so on and so on.
Okay.
Thanks.
We're actually running quite short of time. Time's gone quick. Arno, well, let's go back to you for a last question.
Yeah, perhaps one more question. So we talk of Europe regarding the ecosystem of startups. So you raise a lot of money. What were the issue or the difficulty you face by raising this money, and what were the relation to risk when you raise this money, and what would be the difference perhaps with the US or other countries?
Yeah, so your question is about the risk, I mean, the challenge of raising money or the risk of raising money?
The challenge of raising money and for the investors, for the European investors, their relationship to risk.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, in a way, maybe I'll step back a bit, but I think we like to tell ourselves in Europe that it's really hard to raise money, and it's because we're in Europe, and it's much easier in the US. I don't, if I'm honest, I don't think it's true. I think, yes, you have more funding in the US, but you have more companies actually looking for funding. So today, I think it's quite possible actually to raise money from Europe. Quite a few companies have done that recently. So I don't think it's always a challenge to fundraise whether you're in the US or in Europe. So I don't think it's easier in the US. I also think the environment today has changed quite a lot. So today you can raise from anywhere. So today, if you're a company in Ukraine, if you're a company in Lithuania, if you're a company in Paris, you can go and raise from European investors or US investors. When we went, like I have this interesting anecdote, when we went fundraising for the $100 million, I was in Silicon Valley talking to a VC, which had never invested in a French company. And I asked him, like, okay, would you invest in a French company? You've never done that. And I had this map actually of like all the countries where BlaBlaCar is and wants to go. And he said, well, look, I look at that as a global company that happens to be HQ'd in Paris, and I don't really care about that. I don't really look at that as a French company. So I think if you manage to expand your footprint to several countries, people don't really look, especially in today's environment, they don't really look at that as being a German or a French or Lithuanian company. They look at like, where do you expand, where your consumers are, and that's what matters the most.
Well, investment is definitely something we're going to come back to in our next Hangout, which is with Jeff Clavier of venture capital firm Softech, and that's at 12 o'clock CET. Please come and join us for that. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Arno. And thank you very much, Nicolas, for joining us here. Thanks for your time. So see you at 12.